Hi, my name is Cheryl Netterfield, and I am here to talk about DevOps from an outsider's perspective. What makes me an outsider in this? Well, I am a physician by training, and I worked as a military, Reg Force military medical officer for over 24 years with the Canadian Forces. I moved around a lot in around Canada and was licensed, have been licensed in over 5 provinces, been on multiple deployments, and my experiences have been with very complex patients. Because I am a family physician, I was frequently in charge of taking care of complex patients and leading teams of a variety of healthcare providers take care of these complex patients. This led me to what you see at the bottom there is the logo and the name for the company that I've started. I am a physician entrepreneur and am currently developing a communication platform, a digital communication platform for healthcare providers. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. I'm going to start in talking about medical data because I think it's quite important. And obviously, that is the main reason why we digitize healthcare, because we just have so much data to manage. Now, obviously, data started many, many years ago at the time of papyrus, which was quite interesting. These are early medical documents from many years ago. And 1990 is when I started med school. That is supposed to be me there in my lab coat and my stethoscope on. And this is what I started with. This is all that I was familiar with. I hadn't owned a computer at that time at all. There was nothing small to carry around in your pocket. And we had paper files, and I'm sure many of you remember this. We took notes. These are called progress notes. Some things were transcribed and typed. And then we lead into some kind of archaic filing system. I never did learn how this works, but something was organized for the paper file so that you could find things. Was it easy to find things? Not necessarily so. And then we move forward to today, where we have something called an electronic medical record system, electronic health records. And I actually have not yet met one that I liked, that I enjoyed working with, and I've worked with quite a few. They are faulty by design. They're very difficult to use, and we just think that we can keep on piling more and more information in these and that they're going to serve our purposes. They do become outdated quickly because there's new information added all the time. Now, what happens as a result of this is healthcare providers are now data entry personnel. That's not necessarily the reason why I went into medicine, why healthcare providers started their career. And there's a burden of electronic medical records, and that has to be taken into consideration when people are developing platforms, developing software for healthcare. Unfortunately, many of the EMR systems fail because the healthcare providers cannot use them. I recently took my daughter to the emergency department for a fairly simple issue, and I remember 2 healthcare staff taking at least 30 to 35 minutes to collectively, the 2 of them together, enter data into a platform that they had already been using for a year. And that can tell you that there's, again, as you can see, a loss of productivity. Obviously the steep learning curve here did not negate the fact that they could not enter that data into the platform as they needed to. Is it truly portable? Is it truly durable? Is it fully compatible with other systems? And I think most of us know the answer to that already. Electronic records and physician burnout, taken from an article last year. 40 to 50% of doctors are at some stage of professional burnout. Now, this was last year. Imagine if we tried to estimate these numbers now. I do not have the scientific papers for that. There will be many coming out, but this is a very, very near and dear topic for me because the pandemic has changed quite a bit. But when you see healthcare providers that are burnt out, they have a lot of symptoms similar to depression, anxiety. You can add in substance abuse, family problems. Obviously, divorces, family issues are quite common. And what they have found out is that it is possible that the introduction of electronic medical records was the reason for many physicians to retire. Now, of course, I'm referring to the older physician, but what is sad about this is that they're the ones with all the knowledge. The newer docs that are coming out who are very slick with electronic medical records don't have the years behind them. So we are actually losing one of our most valuable resources, which are the doctors that are older, closer to retirement age, but could have served a lot of purpose, mentoring, advising, guiding younger doctors, and we're losing them because of electronic health records. And I would also definitely say with a lot of certainty that many doctors have retired due to the pandemic also. I remember this was me before I was interested in digital healthcare, and you literally, I know many clinicians that do this, click any key and see what happens. That's just the way our brains think. We don't have the time to try and figure out how a platform works, so we will get very impatient and just click away. This is how I felt when our electronic medical records were introduced to us when I was in the military. We had a health system introduced to us that people from Ottawa would come and visit us. I was in Winnipeg at the time. And here they go. I remember getting some training. I do. Some tech support, but it ended up being at a distance. And it felt like just sign here, it's all yours, and off we go. And now we're using a completely new system. It was not without its stresses and tensions, to say the least. I find this quite interesting because healthcare is one of the least digitalized industries. It's complex, it's complicated. I am so dedicated now to finding ways to digitize healthcare. I'm picking a little piece of the puzzle to try and chew off, but healthcare is so far behind, and we need the advantages of digitization, but it's a matter of trying to figure out how to do it properly. I don't have all the answers. Me discussing this today is mainly to raise questions and raise awareness. Think of all the information that healthcare providers get. So we have to know about their medications. We do a physical exam. Sometimes patients get surgery. Lots of different tests. X-rays, MRIs, CTs. This is to represent pathology, and now we have wearables. Each one of these has a record or a document to go with it. So how overwhelming is it when you have this much information on a patient times 10, times 100, and trying to go through all this? And it literally looks like this is. It's different writing, different styles, different numbers, different words, different pictures on all of these. And then these each change with each place that you go to. So the lab test from one lab looks different than the lab test from the next place to the next place to the next place. There is no standardization whatsoever. I have a bit of data here. It says that according to research compiled by DataVent, over 4 trillion gigabytes of healthcare data is generated annually, and it is projected to double every 2 years. Experts say that this data is also completely unstructured, making it difficult to navigate and keep current. Totally agree with that. Cognitive overload. Being a healthcare provider is exhausting. Trying to go through all this information and make heads or tails of it is very, very difficult. Now we add more data, though most of this is discrete element. It's very structured. But this is data as to what's going on in the patient. It actually doesn't tell you really how they feel, what they're thinking, and not necessarily how well they're actually functioning. I think this will get much better over time, but these are numbers, and we actually don't treat numbers, we treat patients. So gathering all this extra data may or may not help us treat the patient. This is one of my favorite finds because it really struck me how much data we collect on patients in so many different varieties. You'll notice up at the top that there's 2 red ovals that I just highlighted there. We're separating this into structured and unstructured data. So all of the structured data that actually has a discrete element, a number, an actual value that's entered. And then when you go on the right-hand side of the slide, over on the right-hand side of that big black line, it's unstructured data. And this is actually the most valuable information, and we cannot compare it very well. So I'm going to circle the most important area there. It starts with the chief complaint, goes down to the differential diagnosis, and includes things like reports, but also the physical examination and our notes. The chief complaint is actually the most important piece of information you get from the patient. This is in their words. It's not standardized to our language. And in fact, all of our physical examinations and clinical notes aren't standardized from one healthcare professional to the next. So that means a doctor versus a nurse versus a social worker versus a physiotherapist and a psychologist all write their notes slightly different in a different manner. And we cannot compare this data very well. So that is one of the biggest issues with healthcare. This is quite interesting that they think that there's a number of facilitators for the adoption of healthcare innovation. But when I look at the top left-hand corner, I do question this. They talk about interoperability of healthcare systems being a facilitator, yet this is the biggest complaint right now, is that they are not interoperable. There really is no coordination of effort right now. In fact, in Canada, provinces are not mandated to cooperate with each other. There's no legislation that says thou shalt all use this electronic medical record or electronic medical healthcare system. In fact, I know on the East Coast in Canada, there was something passed that the healthcare providers would go away from one selected one to choosing their own, which actually decreases interoperability. When I think of patient adoption, connection, ease of use, and meaningful feedback is great, but these are also barriers too, because connection isn't always there. They are not always easy to use. And it depends on what kind of feedback that it is talking about. Physicians are not quick to pick up on technology. Having said that, things have changed. It's almost been forced upon us, and actually probably a bit too fast. Many clinicians had to go from a typical clinical visit scenario to virtual medicine. Extremely stressful, very little guidance as to what platforms to use that were secure enough to use. And some of these clinicians were not tech savvy. They literally were just getting used to electronic medical records. So huge changes for healthcare, but will speed up the adoption of technology, certainly. So this is taken directly from an article from Macadamian Software. They are a specialty software development firm that deals just with digital healthcare. And they have an article about how to implement DevOps in healthcare. So I know this infinity loop is well recognized by folks, and the identification of the key people involved in DevOps, specifically for healthcare. What I think of when I look at this diagram is that each person here needs to have an intimate knowledge of both healthcare, but also of technology to make this work. Without that, this relationship is not a strong one, and the implementation will likely be very expensive, very cost inefficient, timely, and may not actually develop a product that is useful or that anybody wants to buy at all. So I'm going to talk about my journey and share with you the struggles that I had, maybe that I'm still having. I have a prototype developed now, an early prototype, but I've learned so much along the way because I am non-technical. The problem that I'm trying to address specifically in healthcare is that each healthcare provider provides documents in a different language, as I mentioned before, and you can't directly compare. I'm also very interested in measuring outcome measures or the value of healthcare interventions. And current solutions just collate everything, and interpreting and analyzing this is very difficult, as you can see by all the data that we do collect. So I'll give you an example. There's a patient and they're worried about how she is walking, and each healthcare provider will actually talk about it using a different language, and you cannot compare this directly to actually say how well the person is walking unless you're all in the room talking to each other. So in essence, we're actually not talking to each other. There really is no good communication. For my own value proposition, Palm Health, the company that is developing this platform, delivers a customizable communication platform for interdisciplinary care teams to produce a single convergent care management plan using a standardized language. So of course, before I even knew what I was doing, I said, well, let's make an app and see how this goes. And that started my journey of from a number of years ago to where I am now. And I was slick enough to recognize that it needed to be easy to learn, quick to learn, easy to use, relevant, and fit into a clinical workflow. As a clinician myself, that was my mandate for other healthcare providers. And I started out with a university project and working on the front-facing portion of the platform. There's no database for this. And looking back on this now, this would not have served its purpose well. It was too complicated, too confusing, too much information. And at that time, because I am very detail-oriented, I thought that this was okay. I did not do a good enough job talking to end users, partially because I actually did not know how back then, in the manner in which you need to collect information in order to start developing something that somebody is actually going to use. This reminds me of, these are just graphic displays or mock-ups of ways that we could play around with the numbers. And this reminds me to talk about the numbers specifically. I had some very interesting discussions between myself and non-healthcare provider tech people. And sometimes people who are technical or data analysts love to average numbers out. But what happens if that's not what the clinician needs? You're going to be losing valuable data sometimes if you play around with the numbers in the wrong way. Taking averages, means, standards, deviations does not necessarily provide a clinician with the information that they need. So that's the point that I wanted to make about this slide. We went on to actually make a back end with a simple front facing look to the platform and had a login and had the ability to gather data and put it into a back end. And we had some data that we could give to clients that was not necessarily simple, easy, and fast to read. Again, trying this out, not taking it into a clinical environment yet, doing a little bit of user testing and moving forward from there. And this is where I actually learned a lot more about user testing. There's a local college in Ottawa here where I got to work specifically with students who were just going to develop the front end. And we did do some formal user testing, not with a lot of people, but to get the ball rolling and get feedback from that. And I probably learned more from this experience working through different screens of the platform than I did with most of the back end portion, because we really didn't go as much into usability. Going back to the earlier non-UX group that I was working with, the other platform developers, we had a data entry screen here that literally took probably 5 to 7 clicks to get one value entered. And I admittedly made the mistake of taking this to a clinical team who, not surprisingly, did not want to use this. And I recognized that one of the principles in development is to take a product out that you would be embarrassed of so that you can get rapid feedback and change it. More an agile process. And I recognize that that is not something I will do again. It needs to look better, work better, be slicker, because it's not appropriate to waste people's time. The students, once again, this fuzzy dashboard was just them playing around. I had no input in this. I wanted them to test it out for their own sake, recognizing that graphic display of information can be very good in some instances, but also very bad. The top left corner of this is basically a graph, which worked very well, but the radial bar and the histogram were absolutely not useful at all for clinicians. In fact, I even had a hard time understanding that. These are good things to know, good things to test out, and good things to get feedback on. When I think of the main information that or the lessons learned that I take out of this is that, yes, there's a lot of data to look at. And it's not, we need to know what data is relevant. In healthcare, there's actually more than what we can manage. Not all of it is relevant. There is unnecessarily duplication. And as this little poster says, or this little snippet here says, that it's actually filter failure. We need to learn what filters to apply better. How do you get to those filters? How do you find out which filters are the most important and how to apply them? And it's getting to know the end users and how they're going to use it. For my own project, there's a variety of users, which includes the healthcare providers, indirectly the patient and their family, but also importantly are the administrators and the healthcare organizations. They each need different filters, and that needs to be teased out by exploring each one of them individually to ensure that they're getting the information that they need and not more. Not more information. I think that's critical. Mine is a standalone platform. It's not meant to be an electronic healthcare record. And that purpose of these filters suits very well for that type of application. I know that we're going to have some time for questions, but I invite anybody to reach out to me either by my personal email there or through my LinkedIn. I am the only Cheryl Netterfield on LinkedIn. And delighted to meet other people to talk about this dilemma of trying to come up with better processes to tackle the complexity of creating digital health tech products. It's never fast, it takes time. Many people don't understand much about it. As an entrepreneur, I've been involved with a variety of accelerators, and I always feel pressured to get to certain milestones before the product is ready. There's security and privacy requirements that are not well understood by many people. And there are measures that have to be met before this is introduced, especially initially in a low risk environment. And I'd like to thank you for allowing me to share my thoughts and my opinions with you. This is just one person's journey through this maze of development, and happy to talk about my successes and my failures, because I think these are important lessons learned that can be transferred over to others. And I hope I've given enough of an impetus to have people share their thoughts too, so that we can have some healthy discussions. So thank you very, very much. And I'll now leave it open for questions from anybody in the audience. Thank you so much.